This afternoon to be talking to David McCourt live in Los Angeles. I'm in the Algarve in Portugal, and David is if you don't know David's quite a well-known celebrity entrepreneur, Irish American, done the most amazing things. Started as an entrepreneur when he was in his early 20s. Founding his first company, McCourt Cable Systems, operating as a designer and builder of cable networks. It grew to be the largest privately owned designer and builder of cable systems in the US. But then he went into the job of taking on the big old Bell telephone monopolies, and he did telephone and cable work for customers, dramatically improving customer service, installation time and so forth. He also has done some quite interesting things in strange parts of the world, such as the Caribbean island of Grenada, and also in Mexico and various other places as well. David, it's a great pleasure to be talking to you this afternoon. How are you?
Oh, Richard, the pleasure's mine. The pleasure's mine.
Okay, great. Well, we haven't got a lot of time, David, so can I press on with the questions? Because I think anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur, or anyone in business generally, or indeed anyone who wants to be a social revolutionary, can benefit from your wisdom. Why did you become an entrepreneur at such a young age? Very unusual thing to do. And then how did you decide to go into the slightly unlikely business of designing and building cable networks, which is a real heavy duty sort of, a real world sort of stuff. So why did you become an entrepreneur? What was behind that?
Well, you know, when I started, we didn't really use the word entrepreneur as much as it's used today, Richard. It was, more self-preservation. I wanted to be a cop, and that didn't work out. And most, Irish Americans that were first generation, they either became cops or contractors, and I wanted to be a cop, and I was working for a politician at the time, a guy named Tip O'Neill. And while I was in his office, I was reading an article about how cable TV was not going to come to the urban environment because it was too expensive. And I said, that doesn't seem right. There must be a way to make it cheaper. And I became a cable TV contractor, a small one, then got to be a bigger one, then a bigger one. And then I invented a way of building cable systems that sort of revolutionized the way they were built. I basically invented a way to make the conduit with the cable already inside it and put it in big spools. And I talk about this in the book. But anyway, to make a long story short, I then decided to build what effectively became the first competitive phone company in America. And that was, that Richard, was really based on an observation I made, where I was in someone's office in a bank, and I was just having lunch with a buddy of mine, and I saw all these people on computers, and I was like, I always thought of a bank as people on the phone all the time, and I realized that the phone system was moving, was more computers were talking to computers than people were talking to people, and I said to myself, geez, it doesn't seem right that they built the phone system 100 years ago for voice, and now it's being used for data. It must not be efficient. There must be a better way to do that. So I built a system designed to move data, and I was able to ride voice on it virtually free. So it sounds complicated, but it didn't sound complicated to a 20-something-year-old at the time anyway.
In other words, you got into the cable business almost by accident via Tip O'Neill's office. And then you got into the telephone and cable business because you just saw an opportunity and thought, why not do it? So is that pretty accurate or not?
Yeah. I think that's pretty accurate. Exactly right. And that's how many things in life happen. I guess down deep, you have to have a dream. There has to be a combination of your dream and your destiny and luck. So you sort of have to have all those things together to make it work. And
well, one of the other things that you surely need is money. And how did you get the backing as a sort of young, unproven ex-politician, ex-probation officer assistant. How did you get the financial wherewithal to take on the old Bell telephone monopolies, which, as you say, have been going for 100 years? Everyone, assumed that they were a permanent fixture on the map of corporate America.
Well, this is where luck comes in, because when I was a contractor, my biggest customer didn't pay me, and I had to lay off all my employees. So it was just me and one other guy named Jim Finnegan. We were just left, and everything but my pickup truck and my partner, Jim, everything else was gone. And in construction, you make money and then you spend that money you made waiting to get another job. Then you make money, then you spend that money to try to get another job. But when I laid everybody off and I had no money, I went after the customer that hadn't paid me, and I went after him with a vengeance. And when he paid me, all of a sudden I had money but no employees to pay. So for once in my life, I had a little bit of cash, and I didn't have any payables because I had shut everything down.
It's a fascinating story. By the way, I must tell my listeners that the book is called Total Rethink, and it really has a fascinating story. It's a unique book. It's beautifully presented. There are revolutionary covers in the book, sent from Fidel Castro, no less. And it's a combination of very, very idiosyncratic autobiography, really, with a great deal of business advice and business wisdom. And I think it's a unique book. I can tell this book is not the book that has been ghosted. You can tell it's very authentic to one particular individual. And also, you can tell it hasn't been poured over, as many books are now, by copy editors and professional publishers who say you can't say that, you shouldn't say that, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's a very, very refreshing book. And you tell the great story about how you took on the person who hadn't paid you. And it's a bit hazy since I read the book, but you actually threatened to dig up part of a system that you created. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, what I did was I was in a bar, not unusual for an Irishman, right? So right. I was in a bar and talking to a friend of mine, and he just said, "Look, you've just got to take matters into your own hands. You can't sit here and bitch about it." So I called up the guy that owed me the money, and I said, "Look, I don't care if you pay me anymore. I'm going to take my work back." And I threatened to dig up his system. And we dug up a couple feet of it just to prove we were serious. And it started, of course, a huge shitstorm. And they brought him to the table. And that was on a Tuesday, I think. And by Thursday, he had paid me everything he owed me. And it was the lucky stroke of my life, because with that, I built the first competitive phone company in America, which was very small. I mean, keep in mind, it sounds big, but my very first customer was two buildings, the Bank of Boston, across the street from each other. So my very first, the very first thing I did was, put a cable 60 feet across the street from one Bank of Boston building to another. And then they paid me. Then I connected another building, and then another building, then another building. My second customer, which was the Polaroid Corporation, the people who made the instant photograph, and I connected their buildings. Digital equipment was my third customer. So I started with one customer in one building, or two buildings rather, and then worked my way up. And it was, looking back on it, it was very revolutionary. But at the time, it just seemed like a young man, trying to find his way in the world.
Yes, but there was a real logic to it, as you said. The fact that people were trying to use a system designed for telephone when data was being shoved down it. The idea that it might actually be better to blow up the whole thing and have a rethink, as you describe it. It seems very obvious in retrospect, and it seems obvious that if it was going to work at all, it would work on a huge scale, or could work on a huge scale. And one of the lessons that I take away from your book is that many people do not go to the stage of really scaling something which can be powerfully scaled. But you had some assets there. You had chutzpah, you had the idea, and you also had three very, very gilt-edged blue chip customers as well, and that couldn't have hurt. At what stage did it strike you that you were actually going to change the face of telephony and data in the United States and then later around the world? Was there a point at which you suddenly realized, hey, you know, this isn't just going to be a little business, this is going to be massive?
I think probably I got a call from the commissioner of the FCC to testify before Congress on number portability. Because you remember when I first started, the phone company owned your phone number, so you could get someone. I could say to you, "Hey, Richard, I have a better service for you, and it's going to be cheaper and faster and better." And you'd say, "Great, I want to sign up." But then I had to say to you, "By the way, you have to change your phone number," and that was obviously something you weren't really happy about. And you know, me and a lot of other people had to testify before Congress and get the government to change, to allow people to own their phone number, which young people just assume that's the way it always was, but it wasn't the way it always was. And someone, a younger version of me, has got to march down to Congress and to the equivalent in the UK and every other developed country and get now data portability. Like I helped get number portability. We now need data portability, where every person owns their own data. You know, Facebook won't be happy hearing this, but that's the way it needs to go. Yeah. I mean, the data should not be owned by these big corporations. It should be owned by the individuals. And you should make a choice as to whether or not you want someone to monetize your data. And you should get a piece of the revenue for that. So this is, you know, it never seemed like I was changing the face of telecom at the time. But afterwards, when you look back at it, and in America, which is a big country, with thousands and thousands of cable systems, because they were all small at the beginning. They were all little local entrepreneurs, and then eventually they got bought up by big companies. But there was, I think when I was in the business, there was 12,000 cable operators in America. Not one had ever lowered their monthly rates. They all went up every year. And when I overbuilt Somerville, Massachusetts, which is a little town right next to Cambridge, right outside of Boston, it was the first town in America where the cable and phone rates went down year over year because there was competition. And that was a very proud moment. You know, it only went down by a couple bucks, but it went down. Yeah. And it was the first time that ever happened. So that was a very cool moment for me.
So it was partly having the regulators and the Congress actually side with this tiny little David versus the old Goliath, and it was partly the realization that price reduction could increase the size of the market and your market share as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, the regulators, Richard, though, they always come late. You know, they always, I mean, think about this, the Telecom Act of 97, the internet was invented in the 70s, okay? And in 1997, the big Telecom Act that was going to revolutionize telecom in America only mentions the word internet twice in two irrelevant sections. So regulators are always late to the game, but they're not supposed to be cutting edge. They you know, they see a problem and they try to regulate a solution. They're not really good at putting regulation in place to prevent problems.
Okay. But
maybe that's part of the game.
Okay, but it was a fact that you got going. You started to increase market share. In order to decrease price, of course, you have to decrease cost. And so, was there a stage in which it dawned on you that you could take a very large share of the total market in different regions as well, in different countries, or was it just a gradual realization? You put one foot in front of the other, and then gradually the business became very, very large?
I guess it was, in retrospect, it was very, very quick. At the time, it seemed like it was just one day in front of the other. You know, I mean, when we moved into Colombia and Mexico and other countries out of the United States. We went into Mexico. I think our average customer in the States for voice, video, and data, I think our average customer, we were in very urban environments, but I think our average customer was something like $130 a month for all services combined. We went to Mexico and we had to offer a service for $15 a month because that's all they could afford to pay.
Yeah.
My entire company, my entire senior management team was like, Dave, you're out of your mind. There's no way we can offer a service at $15 a month. And, you know, we were at 50% gross margin in the States. And I said, okay, well, let's pretend we're going to make 50% gross margin again. That means we have $7.50 of cost that we can spend. So let's figure it out. And I remember my CFO saying, look, you can't even afford to send out bills and collect on bad debt. And I said, okay, well, that's the first thing we'll do. There won't be any bills. We'll let people pay upfront in cash. And this was before there was prepaid cards. And I said, that'll take care of the bad debt and that'll take care of the bills. So that's two problems gone.
And then you solved the problem of installation by getting the customers, Mexicans, to self-install. That's an absolutely amazing story. People must have said you were completely out of your mind. But what gave you the idea to do that with Mexicans? I mean, I'm sure that Mexicans are great people, but yeah.
It's self-preservation because there was no way we could make money.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no way we could make money unless we did that, unless we had them do the self-install, unless we had them pay up front. We couldn't afford any bad debt, so we had to have the cash up front. We couldn't afford disconnects, so we had to come up with a method to make sure that once people signed up, they stayed signing up.
I thought that was one of the best stories in the book about your private lottery to encourage people to continue paying their monthly amount and not to disconnect. Can you tell the story? You actually had this idea of having a lottery, and then every 3 months you had a prize, and tell us what the prize was and why it worked so well.
Well, I was in the car, and we were in bumper to bumper traffic, and I noticed that in I think we're in Guadalajara, and I noticed that there was all these one-story sort of cinder block houses, and they all had rebar or reinforcing rod, you know, those metal reinforcing rods that contractors use to tie together.
You mean on the roof, on the top of the building?
Yeah, well, yeah, but these buildings are only one story, so they were coming out of the top.
Yeah.
But it's just half-inch diameter metal rods. It's called reinforcing rod or rebar. So all this rebar was sticking out the top of the buildings, and I asked the Mexican guys that were in the car with me. I said, "What is all that?" And they said, "Well, they put that there in case they ever going to pour another floor, build another floor of on top of the house." And I said, "But so many people do it. Why?" And they said, "Because every Mexican man is an optimist, and he's hopeful that he'll be able to build another floor in his house when one of his kids gets married, and they're optimistic that they'll get enough money to be able to do that and care for their kids because they're very family oriented, and the kids, you know, live close or in the same house as their parents after they get married, and that's sort of how it works in that demographic in that part of the world." And they said that that's their dream, to be able to afford a house for one of their kids when they get married. And then I said, "How much do these houses?" They're very small. These houses are only about 800 square feet or 1,000 square feet. I said, "How much do these houses cost to build?" And they told me, I can't remember what the number was now, but it was a very, very small number. They're very simple square block houses.
I think you said it was $1,200 or some ridiculously small amount of money.
It was some very, very small number like that. And I said, it gave me the idea. I said, well, maybe we could afford to build one and auction it. And I was first thinking to auction it off. And then I began to fine tune my thinking. And I said, why don't we have a lottery and we'll give a ticket to everybody that pays their bill. And if they're so optimistic and they have this dream of having a house, why don't we auction one off? So every month that you pay your bill, you get a lottery ticket. So if you paid your bill 6 months in a row, you get 6, 12 months in a row, you get 12, 18 months in a row, you get 18. So once you're getting 12 or 18 lottery tickets every month when you pay your bill, you're never going to disconnect because then you'd have to start all over again. So if you paid your bill for 36 months in a row, that month you get handed 36 lottery tickets as you come in and pay your cash. Yeah. So it was No one disconnected. It was unbelievable. No one disconnected. And then we started out at the beginning, every quarter we auctioned off a house, and then eventually every month we lotteried off a house. And it was brilliant. And these houses, they weren't furnished. They were just these square cinder block, very simple houses. But every month we gave one away, and it was, and we had no disconnect. It was brilliant.
It plays to all sorts of psychological principles, such as loss aversion. Once you've got something, you think you're getting your 36 lottery tickets. You don't want to lose them, even though, of course, a lottery ticket may be completely worthless. But as you say, they were optimists, and therefore they actually believed that sooner or later they would win the lottery and they could give a house to one of their children or another relative. I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea, and it's certainly original.